Hello everybody, I just asked ChatGPT what a collective of a group of Directors Generals was, and it said a complication. That's true. Hello everyone, happy Tourism Week and welcome to DestinationQ. I'm really delighted to be joining you again, and thank you to everyone in this room for what you've done and what you will do into the future. And there is a real sense of optimism at the moment in this state. And you better believe that you're going to be part of it, and you can feel that at the moment, and there are bigger and better things ahead. We've spoken a lot about Destination 2045, and yes, it is big, it is bold, and it's a vision, but what's best about it is it's yours. And I want to acknowledge how much time you put into it, in many cases time that you couldn't spend on your business or in your organisation, and yet you chose to do it for the greater good. And I do want to acknowledge the efforts of the Minister, Andrew Powell, who coordinated it and allowed you to flourish. He's a fine minister, not much of a husband who would take his wife on her significant birthday to a conference. That's bad planning, but one hell of a minister, and I want to thank him for the work that he's done. And indeed, all of his colleagues, and I acknowledge the Deputy Premier who's joined us, but right across the board, to have the representation of the Ministers and Directors General shows how much your industry means to us. This year's theme is Shaping the Future of Tourism, and I know if you combine that with Destination 2045, you understand the vision where we're heading, but you need to believe that we're also focused on the here and now, and the opportunities that are presenting themselves and are starting to emerge right now before us. And I mentioned you can feel that, and it's important that we don't, for one stage, lose that momentum. We must keep driving it. Everything we do has to be focused on driving that momentum continuously all the way through to 2032, and then we use that as the platform to go to the next level once the eyes of the world have been on us. It's been 6 months since the launch of that plan, and I want to go through a few things that have followed. $1 billion investment over the forwards, and that's in aviation, events, and indeed securing the future of tourism and events Queensland. And I do have to acknowledge the work that Andrew did in going to the Treasurer and the broader CBRC and making sure that that was funded, because to have seen what would have unfolded for TEQ would have been, in my mind, removing a real pillar in an organisation that needs to have the freedom, the flexibility, but also the funding to be able to do great things for our state. We've spoken a lot about ecotourism, the 45 by 45, but you better believe that people are going to be seeing new products jumping out of the ground, and they already are. And if we do that in a coordinated way, come 2032, people will not only see the new product that's been developed, they will see the pipeline that's coming through. And that will drive the generational approach that we intend to take to Queensland tourism. The Traditional Owners Partnership, a sleeping giant in Queensland tourism. We have an amazing story to tell of our First Nations people, and we can use it to drive visitation and economic opportunity for our First Nations people. That holiday feeling branding, which was owned and driven from the ground up, and in my mind will be one of those defining moments of telling a new story and telling it our way. And then there's the announcement I made last year when I stood before you, which was the establishment of the Tourism Cabinet Subcommittee, which the Director General just touched on. It's met 4 times. It will have met 5 times by the end of this year. And every time they go in there, the focus is on how can we grow this opportunity? How can we keep driving new opportunities for you and for the broader sector? Which leads me to today's announcement, which mixes education and tourism. And I want to go back to the genesis of this announcement, back to 2021. It was March. I was new to the role as opposition leader, but I still had that focus on tourism, which I love and continue to this day. And I saw how much the industry was hurting during COVID, particularly the far north. And we took up the fight for a fund to be able to incentivise students to be able to not just go to Canberra, but to come and experience what was in their backyard. And we pushed pretty hard, and in the next budget, we were able to secure that program that has continued to this day. Sadly, that program is due to end, and today I can announce that it will be funded into the future to make sure that pipeline of encouraging students to head to the reef continues. But I want to also make a further announcement, and that is that we'll be lifting the funding for the Outback component for the students to the same level, to that $150. Thank you. And in front of Anne Lay, I'll say that it'll also be extended to Balonne and Maranoa Shires as well. She always comes with friends. And it's important that we make sure that we incentivise people to do both. Do the reef, do the bush, and we can continue to show people how special what is in their backyard truly is. I want to conclude with the following. Dream big. Make this opportunity of Tourism Week your opportunity when you've got the arms of government here to explain what you want to see. I don't accept that Queensland tourism has reached its zenith, far from it. But I do go back to a time when it was easier to get things done. And some of the questions that the complication of Directors General were given earlier before point to that. And we must get that back. We must have a time where, provided there are strict rules, where people respect the environment, respect traditional owners, respect the economy, we must dream big again. And everything we're doing is about that. We want people to understand that it is only the beginning of where Queensland tourism will get. And we have a golden runway. It's now less than 7 years. And we spend a lot of time talking about the infrastructure that we need to develop. And it's really important. Roads and rail, that's really important. Those sporting facilities that will drive generational opportunities, that's really important. But think about the social opportunities. Think about what we can do in that space in creating a vibrant arts culture, making sure that the Paralympic Games can put us on the map for accessibility, and think about tourism. Think about what it will be. It's the greatest marketing campaign that we will ever be given, and we have no intention of squandering it. And I ask you to come on that journey as you dream big for the future of tourism to 2045. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Premier. And again, I invite anybody who has a question today for the Premier to just pick up your QR code that is on your table. Come closer. And send those through to us as we begin this conversation. I was excited to hear about your announcements, and there are some beautiful brochures that will go along with those today. Everyone can take a closer look at them.
Mark Olsen.
Yeah, of course.
Never misses an opportunity.
No, of course
never.
Not. He'd be up here on the stage if he could. These, though, can we just quickly touch on this again? Because we know where the intersection is of tourism and education, not just because it means a generation of Queensland kids and hopefully then more broadly Australian kids fall in love with these places. And when you love somewhere, and this is the essence of ecotourism, the way that you have these experiences then informs all the other decisions that consciously and subconsciously you make moving forward.
I've often struggled with the concept of not wanting to make the most of natural assets. And I do believe that the people who have resisted it are good people who genuinely care about the environment. I really do, and I go into it with that in mind. But I think the viewpoint is misguided, because if you do it in a respectful way, and we've seen it in Tassie, we've seen it in New Zealand, if it's done respectfully with a low footprint and respect the things that make it important, you can actually generate money and put it back in and improve the environmental outcome. That's the first thing. The second thing is you can create some jobs, which is always wonderful, particularly in a regional area where many of these attractions are. But overwhelmingly, and you just touched on it, Sophie, you create a generation of spear throwers. They become so tribal and so passionate about protecting it because they've seen it and they've lived it. And I think that's the missing piece of the puzzle. And I think as we develop these things and it's done in a respectful way, I think overwhelmingly people will say, okay, I see where it's going, let's pin our ears back and go hard.
I agree with you, Premier, and I think anyone who is in the ecotourism space also then knows that what you hope it does is change the way people live their lives, because all of a sudden you've seen the impact of what choices can make, and if you want to, you protect it when you love it, and you have to learn to love it, and hopefully this is that first step. There's so much I would like to get with you, but I will get to the floor first because I know that the audience today would love to have an opportunity to speak to you directly. Graham is asking, what makes councils, mayors, councillors accountable for tourism? There isn't any tourism training mandatory for local government, especially if councils are cutting tourism budgets. The region has had 4 years of budget cuts and it's affecting tourism business, employment and the economy of Queensland. And I'd sort of take that a little step further, and I know you're aware of this and have had many conversations then about making sure that we have a quality product which has to come with investment.
Graham, I won't ask what region you're from, but I'll make this point. If you're not happy with the council, move them on. And if you believe you can do a better job, put your hand forward and come forward as someone who is a champion for tourism, or find someone who will take that forward. I'm not a big believer in constantly mandating training across different sectors because you could do it 1,000 times over. In the end, the best thing we can do, and it's something that Anne's driving at the moment, we're going to remove a whole heap of regulation and put those people who you elect in charge of their councils again. There's been a big centralisation of power and responsibility in recent years. I'm never comfortable with that. I'm a decentralist, and I want people who live and work in a community to be held accountable from the community. So those changes are going through Parliament pretty soon, and that will give the ability for councillors to be held accountable and take control. And it's your role to show them why tourism matters. And it does. It's such a huge part of every economy. And once upon a time, it was an afterthought for some of the Western Shires. Go telling a Western mayor now that tourism isn't so important. They're few and far between who don't get that. So it's about accountability. And we're doing our end of the bargain to give those councils the power. Then it's over to you. You hold them accountable.
Premier, how does tourism fit into your government's broader vision for Queensland's economic growth and job creation over the next decade?
Well, it's massive. I often, when I speak to people, and there is a genuine mood at the moment where people are looking at Queensland saying something's happening there, which is marvellous. But I always say, I think about the industries that have made us so special in the past. Tourism, mining, agriculture. Those three have been the real mainstay of the development of Queensland through the 80s and then into the early years in the 2000s. Across both of those growth periods, tourism hummed and there was a real push. Likewise with agriculture and mining. And the three of them can work well together. And I also talk about the new opportunities in the new age economy for medical research and education and business relocation, but they all feed in to a broader narrative. If people feel good about themselves and if they feel like I'm living in a really cool place, that actually helps the business investment psyche. And that's why tourism's so important. It's important economically, 1 in 10 jobs in round numbers, but it's also important for people's psyche. If they're seeing people talk about their place with a sense of reverence and pride, that's worth something economically as well, even if not directly.
I know that we're going to hear from the Deputy Premier, so I don't want to go deep into issues of infrastructure, but I would like to ask you your personal opinion on when you see the road now, as you said, to get to 2032, to springboard that into 2045, and you know some of the pressures that we are facing, not the least of which is finding all of these wonderful people to work, not just in tourism, but to set us up for that. Are you still feeling hopeful and optimistic that all of these benchmarks will be met?
More so than ever, and I've got an immense amount of faith in him and in Tim Mander, who's doing the sporting component of it. I'll let him be overtly political. That's his job. I'm the good guy in the relationship. But I do make the observation that when I spoke to people a couple of years ago about the Olympic and Paralympic Games, people were saying things to me like, I just don't want to be embarrassed on the world stage. I'm not hearing that anymore. That there is a real sense of optimism, including in regional Queensland. And I've never been more confident. Yes, there are challenges, and you're right, workforce is one of them, but I've never been more confident about the ability to be able to deliver the infrastructure, and not just the sporting infrastructure across the state. I fast forward in my mind to what 32 looks like, and we're not going to make the mistake that others have made, that you get to 32 and collectively everybody says, oh, thank goodness. We're going to get to 32 and we are going to finish the Olympic and Paralympic Games, and we're going to say, wow, that was pretty cool. Look what we're doing now. And we're just going to drive that opportunity where people say, okay, that's the land of opportunity.
I think that's vital to take the people along the ride who still are feeling like there were so many other pressure points. Why weren't we putting focus elsewhere if they can see beyond that moment? And that's a really important part of the narrative, no doubt about it. Richard from UQ asks, walking, bike and scooter riding are among highly valued by tourists and incredibly beneficial to destinations. How is the Queensland Government supporting and celebrating active transport for the tourism industry?
Through planning and funding. So with planning, councils have often said to us they feel unable to be able to integrate some of the things into their planning scheme, and that has changed. And I think it was just yesterday the Deputy was in the far north where for the first time you've had every single mayor stand up and endorse a regional plan, and that's because they've driven it. And what the magic of the planning schemes that we're doing at the moment is everything, including transport, is embedded in every planning decision. That will bear fruit, yes, in the short term, but very much in the long term. Where do you put your schools and the density accordingly? Where's the best place to put your corridors, but how can I get activity? How can I do a design to improve the safety of a community by using greater visibility in the way that those communities are integrated? All of that has been part of this planning schemes, and we're redoing all of them. So yes, they'll take time, but they will drive the generational opportunity. And then we all have to prioritise the funding. I met my councillor just yesterday, and she made the point to me that with one of the new train stations that's going in, how can we get people onto a footpath rather than drive there? There is a cognizance that needs to occur.
Yeah, and all those pieces eventually do come together if the planning's in place in advance of the first piece being found. Gary from ADT Brisbane, around 25% of tourism dollars go to offshore travel agents. Is there the possibility for a dedicated Queensland OTA?
I'm not normally one to restrict the free market, Gary, but I am one to try to help Queensland businesses. So at the very least, we can be doing our part in working with you and driving people to you. In terms of the mechanics of that, I must say I'm not indeed familiar with it, and you've got someone far more learned sitting in front of me. So, Powley, if you can seek out Gary and help him, that'd be great. In between the date morning that you're having, obviously.
Later in the program of the day, we will be talking about aviation and how that unlocks opportunity. And Mark, off the back of that future conversation, is asking you, firstly, he says, thank you for the GBR funding. You recently travelled to India. How can we attract more investment from India in tourism in Queensland?
That's Olsen, but he's removed his surname to get the question up.
He didn't even pretend he was somewhere.
Mark asks, thank you, Mark. Well, the front and centre, it's about flights. And we have to get a direct flight from India, and it's one of the things that I've tasked Powley to do, and I went and met both of the major providers when I was over there. There is an appetite for sure. The complication is, A, the backlog in aircraft, and B, putting forward a credible offer. One of the things I heard from the Directors General panel before, and I think it might have been Graham Frayne, and it was really apt. We at the moment are attracting events, and not just with a checkbook. There's also that sense of coordination, and I look at the Royal Military Tattoo. That wasn't bought because we threw an exorbitant amount of money, more so than others. It was bought because everyone came together as this one coordinated push and said, hey, we want this, we're open for business, here you go. And I look at this as the same thing. We just need to keep banging down the door and explaining why this is worthwhile, and we will incentivise the first mover. And I think that's one of the magic of when you have an aviation fund, where you strip out the politics of what's, where can I get a short-term sugar hit? It's about how can we incentivise. And in this case, whoever moves first gets a crack. Whoever comes second can be the beneficiary of the person who takes a crack.
I did want to just touch then a little further on major events. That was obviously a big part of the conversation leading up until this point. We heard about the way that it drives visitation, but beyond the calendar, how do you also see then the delivery of real return, not just for the operators, but for industry and for the economy more broadly?
By making them long term. And I think one of the challenges is if you enter into short-term deals, you will never get the long-term burn where people are repeat visitors. if you get people as repeat visitors, you then have the data of who they are, what they're doing, and what interests them, and then you can directly target and market to them. And I think that's been one of the missing pieces of some of our marketing strategies. We know so much about people these days, and yet in many cases we have probably continued to market in a similar way that we always have. There is an ability to talk directly to people because they volunteer so much information to you. If you know they're coming back and you know where from and what they did last time, you can incentivise them to stay a little longer and spend a little more. And that's how you benefit. That's how you benefit from making sure there's longer term deals. And some of the things that Andrew's been driving, some of the opportunities, we've had people come to us and say, we're interested in moving a round or a game of this or an event here. And our initial response is tremendous. We'd like to lock you in for 7 years. Are you willing to do the dance? That to me is a better play than a one-off. I'm not saying one-offs don't have some magic in them, but the longer term play makes more sense.
So speaking of magic, can you give us any insight as to whether or not we may be able to be the home of Magic Round well into the future?
Well, Peter Volandis is Greek, I'm Italian, so the negotiations are pretty forceful. No, I'm very confident. I'm very confident. But the offer we want to make isn't just about money. I want to see far more activation in Caxton Street so everyone can benefit. I want to see school visits so that kids can feel enlivened. I want to find ways that the high-end traveller who wants to come here might be able to also do an experience outside of Brizzy. So all of that is more important to me than just how big a cheque can we write. And everything we're doing is about driving value. It's not about whether or not it's not about me standing beside someone saying, "Oh, this guy's amazing because he's giving me a lot of money." It's about standing up and saying, "Wow, that state is open for business," and have a look at the things we're doing. And I'd also like to see, can we stretch it out a little bit more? Is there the ability to try to get people here a little longer? Watch this space.
Finally, how is the department using new science and data capabilities to help operators make better evidence-based decisions?
I think we just touched on it before. We've got an immense amount of data which tells you who's doing what and where they're doing it. But it's also about interacting with people who do have those big dreams. And I don't want a situation where someone who wants to invest here feels as though it's too clunky. Because in the modern era, people can make a decision to take their capital anywhere, and we don't want that. We really want them to come here. And part of the reason they should come here is because we have a inbuilt marketing campaign called 2032 that is going to drive people by default to their product with or without anything they do. So there is a genuine opportunity to use data analytics to show that the kind of traveller who's coming here, but also to make sure that people who come to us are treated with respect for their intellectual property and given the opportunity to be able to invest with a definitive yes or no, and here's the time frame.
I think few would disagree, Premier, when I say that you have taken to this role in a way that has seen change happen very quickly and with clarity. So if you were to have the final word then here to say, what do you believe that maybe is the most important thing that the government and industry, given that this is the industry that we're talking to in the room, can do better together over, let's just say, the next 12 months to DestinationQ 2026 on the Gold Coast?
Sell yourself. Tell people why you're good. I find this industry is full of doers, people who just go and do. And its shortcoming is it's not full of people who are prepared to say, I'm pretty bloody good at what I do. And I think that's by virtue of how busy that people are, but also it's such a resilient industry, and people cling on during tough times, during pilot strikes and disease epidemics and highs and lows of economies where in the past tourism has been the first thing that's faded. That's not happening anymore. And I can't see it happening anymore. I genuinely don't. I think there's a level of inbuilt desire for people to always prioritise an experience, even when times are tough, more so than ever before. So you are here, and you are going to be here for the long haul. So tell people that you're good. Sell the message. And what we can do is the confidence that you need to know a couple of things. You're not going to be subject to the rise and falls of funding cliffs. They're going to be there, and we're going to give you the long-term certainty. You're not going to be held up with approvals on the whim of a political mood. If you're complying, you're going to get a yes, and a definitive yes. And above all, I want you to know that we do have a level of confidence about the industry, where it's going, and everything we're doing is going to make sure that we drive that opportunity. And I really do. I can feel it. I can feel a sense, a rumble that's there. And just asking you to sell yourself and come on the journey.
Please put your hands together for the Premier of Queensland, David Crisafulli. Thank you for being a continued champion for tourism and for knowing how important it is as a pillar of our economy. Thank you very much.